So it's super early. I woke up this morning thinking about my current trial. I've been kind of depressed the last couple days and thinking about death, thinking about suffering, thinking about all the stuff that we're going through right now. And I woke up and I kind of had the urge to make this video. The thought crossed my mind through this trial. I've noticed that a lot of people presume on the Lord. What do I mean by that? I mean, they act with the assumption that God is just going to heal me. I think he can heal me, but I don't think we have that promise that he's just going to in this lifetime. Ultimately, the resurrection of the dead will happen, sin will be removed, and we will have uncorruptible bodies where there's no natural evil, but that's not promised to us before the end. I've also noticed a lot of people say things that reveal they believe cancer and suffering and the things we go through are outside of God's plan. And I think that is just a misunderstanding of God's sovereignty. And I think it's important for us to wrestle with that. Job certainly wrestled with that, and we see many other examples of people wrestling with that. And so I want to challenge you, if you think that way, if you think, oh, these things are not of God, that somehow God was caught off guard, you're wrong about that. If you think God is surprised, we might be surprised by our suffering, but if you think God is surprised, you're wrong. Okay? So wrestle with that. I'll read just a couple passages that I want to share. It's hard to limit because there's many, many passages that apply to this topic. And I think we need to understand it as a foundational piece before we even begin to pretend that we're wrestling with this idea. So the first one I wanted to share was from Job chapter 3, verse 9. Job's wife is speaking to him after he lost all his possessions and all of his children, and he's been afflicted with health problems, worse than anything that most of us have ever experienced. And then his wife says to him in verse 9, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So he recognizes that ultimately the good and the suffering are inside of God's sovereign plan. And he wasn't sinful in pointing that out. The next one I want to read is from Lamentations chapter 3, verses 37 and 38. "Who has spoken, and it came to pass, unless the Lord has commanded it? Is not from the mouth of the Most High that good and bad come?" So it's not that God is the author of moral evil. He's not. But he uses evil and suffering for the good of those that love him and to bring glory to himself. There's two kinds of evil, generally speaking. There's moral evil that we commit, and there's natural evil, old age, suffering, death, the things that came with the curse, right? After the fall. If you think that God was surprised by evil, natural or moral, but in this case natural, and that it's outside of his plan, then I have a question for you. Why did God impose the curse? If natural evil was not something that God planned for, if it was outside of his sovereignty, why did he impose the curse? Right? It was in response to sin that he imposed the curse. I think most people understand, right? That you need to read, when you're reading, you need to read things in context. And that's the big thing in the news now. Oh, they took my comments out of context. I said something and they just posted a little snippet of it and it was understood outside of context. Well, that's true with everything. So God, we need to, before we make any comments or claims about who God is, we need to understand who he is. Before we comment and we say, well, I don't like the way that God acts. I don't like the things he's doing. Well, guess what? You need to understand who he is first and interpret the things that you're seeing in that context. God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, and unchangeable, and is being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. And he is those things always, right? So the first part are his incommunicable attributes. That means the attributes that we don't share with him. So he is a spirit only. He's not a body-soul unity. He's a spirit. Infinite. So he's infinite, eternal, and unchangeable. And those three go together. He's infinite, so unlimited in these attributes. Maximum, right? Eternal, without beginning or end, and unchangeable. And they go together in that what is infinite can't be changing, because when you're changing, you are when something changes, you can ask, what's it changing from and what's it changing to? And what is infinite can't increase or decrease, right? You can't become God cannot become more holy than he is. He's infinite in his holiness, and he's unchanging. He's outside of time. Time is a measurement of change, whatever version of time you want to look at. The version we use where we're looking at our clock, it's a measurement of motion, essentially, right? We measure our time in days and months and years. And how are those measured? Those are measured by our rotation around the sun, right? But God is outside of time. He is unchanging. And so he's unchanging in his goodness. So before we ever get to anything that God does, we already know he's unchanging. He is who he is. I am that I am, right? From the beginning. He's unchanging in his goodness. So whatever God is doing with evil, however he's using your suffering, it's for the good. So you might have a hard time understanding what that is, but that's where our wrestling needs to begin, right? The fear of the Lord. Wow, I'm going to die someday. My body is going to die. What does this all mean? And if we don't do that, if we write it off as this is outside of God's plan, then we're probably gonna miss what it means. This is a little bit of a stream of conscious rant this morning, not very planned out, but I thought it was important to share because I think a lot of people just say things without understanding and just find comfort in platitudes, and that's not faith, right? It's not faith to comfort yourself with misunderstandings of who God is and what his plan is. So wrestle with that. Talk to you soon.